in this episode.
Yeah, and if Betty Crocker ever had a recipe for serial killer, I mean, he's got all the mix-ins. So, you got to do something to this guy. You're in trouble,
100%.
Yeah.
Welcome. You're listening to Paleo Cheese Podcast, episode 45, Transgressive Fiction, Mental Health, and Addiction with Tyler Jones.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jeremiah Bannister.
And I'm Chad Lutzke.
And you are watching or listening to Paleo Cheese Podcast, part of Project Entertainment Network. And Chad, we have a very special guest today. We talked about the idea that we were going to have a guest on our last episode, and if people haven't seen it, they've got to check it out. Friday the 13th, parts 1 and 2, our favorite kills in that, and some background behind it. But we said that we had a really awesome guest, and we hyped it up, but we didn't want to say who it was in case something happened, and nothing happened. So we have him today, and we're really excited about this, huh?
Yeah. What happened was, I had just got done reading this book, Criterion. And when I do that, I usually give books a shout out. And while I was doing that, I brought Tyler up and I just thought, I think what I said was he was ridiculously passionate, and that I would be hard pressed to find someone other than yourself, Jeremiah, who is as passionate as this guy was, and that we had to have him on the show. And then soon after that, we reached out. And so tonight, whenever you're listening, we have author Tyler Jones. He wrote Criterion, this book that I just held up. Hopefully you can see it. And The Dark Side of the Room, as well as a few things that he has coming out soon, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But Tyler also had a story in Burnt Tongues, which is an anthology edited by Chuck Palahniuk, and I wanted to ask him about that too. So Tyler, man, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah.
My pleasure. My honor to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. So since we were just talking about the Chuck Palahniuk thing, I did want to, I'm sure you've told this story many times. I don't know that I've heard it. I've seen you on a couple of podcasts, but I did want to know how that happened. And it seems like I heard something about maybe being part of a workshop with Chuck.
Yeah. So the original, the anthology that you're talking about, Burnt Tongues, back in the day, he had a website called The Cult. I don't know if you guys remember that one. It was designed as a forum, a place for writers. So the Cult website eventually became Lit Reactor.
Okay.
So it had a big forum and a pretty vibrant community, like thousands of members who would write stories and post them and get feedback. And it had a really cool system where, so if we say the three of us were in the workshop, the online workshop, I would write a story, I would post it for review. And Chad, if you wanted to post a story, you'd have to read my story and give some feedback, and I'd vote on it. And then that would enable you to post a story. So you had to be involved to keep posting work. Mm-hmm. And this was going for a few years, and I wasn't too into the whole online workshop thing, but I decided I was getting into short story writing. I thought I'd give it a shot. And then Chuck decided that he wanted to put together an anthology of the best stories from this online thing. So that, there were a couple thousand people, and we voted on them basically. Mm-hmm. So if you posted your story, Chad, and I liked it, then I would vote it up. You would vote mine up, Jeremiah's, et cetera, and the top stories would rise. And then from those, Chuck and Dennis Widmeyer, who ran the site, who is now a film director, directed Pet Sematary, and a couple other people would select what they thought were the best and put together an anthology. And somehow one of my stories ended up making it in there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, which was really cool. Yeah. It was cool because the anthology, it's interesting to read it now because it first came into being really early, and it took years for it to get published. So by the time it actually came out, that story was like 5-6 years old. Mm. and a lot of the stories in that anthology are pretty extreme. And so mine is like the tamest of them. So it's kind of interesting to see it in that context, you know?
That was the kind of my next question was, I was wondering if you had read the anthology and if they were, if you think these were maybe picked because they kind of emulated Palahniuk's, just like his transgressiveness, or if they were kind of just more just straightforward, or.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that some of it was the transgressive nature of it. And I think by virtue of the fact that it was through his website, you had a lot of his fans there, and we were all younger writers trying to find a voice. So you had a lot of people, I think, emulating his voice, you know, for better or worse. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting anthology. I think I've heard Chuck say that he'd like to do another one at some point, but I think if you enjoy Chuck's style and you like the transgressive fiction that he writes, I think you'll probably find a bunch of stories in there you like.
Yeah. I haven't read a full book of his. I started Haunted and I read maybe a third of it so far or something. I do like his I do like the transgressive fiction. I'm not a fan of like extreme horror, like gory for the sake of being gory. I like to watch it, you know, like 80s body horror films that are just like Dead Alive or something. They're just ridiculous. I like that, but to read it, I just get bored. I don't know if I'm jaded or what, but the something about the transgressive stuff, talking like some of the stories I've heard Chuck talk about, like he told some on Joe Rogan, and they're their own special kind of horror, and they're really disturbing.
Yeah.
And but there's something about that, and I don't know if I think it's the unpredictable nature of it. Like I can't believe what I'm hearing. I can't believe what I'm reading right here. Maybe it's I'm jaded with the other stuff. Like I was talking with my wife the other day, and I told her, we were talking about a scene I had written in a book, and she said, "Well, why don't you have this guy? This happened to him." And I said, because when someone gets shot, it usually doesn't happen like this. Just I said, there's sometimes where you just everything is so commonplace. Like, and I brought up the beheadings in films. I'm so desensitized, and I think most people are, that when someone is decapitated in a film, it's, unless it's like done like Hereditary or something, it's really not that big of a shocker. It's just like, oh yeah, they lost their head.
A person got their head cut off. What did he do?
It's not really a big deal. But some of this transgressive stuff is offensive in a different kind of a way. I think that Jack Ketchum does some of that stuff too. And when you read particularly in some of his short stories, you know, like there might be this couple that are in love and something, and man, you just know that they're going to die. Something really horrible is going to happen to them. And it's not about gore. It's just about, I don't know, watching something horrific happen after being arrested.
Now, for people who may not know what transgressive fiction is, because I didn't know. You guys were describing it. I'm like, transgressive fiction. I'm like thinking, okay, what is this? Looked it up. Said a genre of literature which focuses on characters who feel confined by the norms and expectations of society and who break free of those confines in unusual or illicit ways. Do you guys think that's legit? Is that a fair summation, or is that so Wikipedia is wrong? I'm surprised. I'm not surprised. We give a better one in case people don't know, because this is a new term for me.
I tend to think of transgressive fiction, which is not something that I write, but I think of it as people doing things that are breaking out of the confines. Like, what does that mean? I think of it as people doing awful, terrible, strange things simply because they want to. If by confines they mean like of a mundane life, you know, I think of a transgressive story would be bored people deciding to torture animals and put it online. That would be a transgressive story.
Right.
You're not necessarily breaking free of anything. They're just behaving in really horrible ways.
I just read I was asked to do a blurb for a collection that's coming out, and there are some stuff in there that I thought were probably transgressive, and this might be, I don't know if Tyler, you probably know a lot more about this subgenre or whatever than I do, but this one story that I read in there, man, it was such a great story. And I'll just briefly, it was basically a man taking his father where he had bought a graveyard plot, and he's very old. He's going to be dying soon. And as they're there overlooking, they have to go on this big old long hike. It's way out of the way. And they have like a guide with them and stuff that's taking them to this kind of private, far off cemetery, like in the hills or somewhere. And while they're there, the narrator is having this internal dialogue, and you start to slowly find out that he's actually, and he's a grown man. He's 30 or 40, something like that. He's in love with his dad. And he wonders what life would have been like had they just met, and that wouldn't been his dad. And then toward the end, he confesses to his dad, and some other stuff happens. But to me, that was kind of like, when I read that, I was like, because I can't define transgressive fiction, and I don't know that I can point it out. But I remember when I finished that story, I was like, I think this is transgressive fiction. Because it felt taboo. It felt but it also felt, it felt taboo, but not in a, I don't know. It's like I was watching somebody's confession that I shouldn't be hearing, maybe.
Yeah.
And but it wasn't done in a grotesque manner. It wasn't done in like a sexual manner or anything like that. But it was just like, wow, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah,
that is really.
I think
the rare thing.
That might be a better definition of transgressive than what I gave, because I think that does tend to define that subgenre is the taboo of people doing things, confessing things that are out of the ordinary. And I think there's a spectrum of it as well. It could be something like people torturing cats, or it could be a confession that no one has ever known and it wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah,
like the real life situation where that guy was just killing cats for real and posting it online, and people got outraged by it because neighbors and stuff in his community, and he kind of went dark for a while, but then he started doing it again. And I if I remember right, they went after him.
They did. There's a whole documentary.
You're the one who told me about it, man. What's it called?
That documentary is amazing, and they just this whole community goes.
They're like, don't mess with cats or something. What's it called?
Don't F with cats, yeah.
Don't F with cats, yeah. I was close. Yeah. I was close.
It's an amazing documentary. They do censor, because the videos, they do censor them. I mean, you kind of get the idea of what's going on, but and he escalates further into this and posts these videos in this whole online community. They end up being just like private investigators working together to find this guy. It's crazy. I recommend watching it.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Because a guy like that ends up being a serial killer a few years down the line.
Was the conversation in our video about serial killers?
Yes, because it was. I was talking about Netflix documentaries that I had seen within the last year that were just phenomenal, and that was one of them. Yeah,
and if Betty Crocker ever had a recipe for serial killer, I mean, he's got all the mixins. So, you got to do something to this guy. You're in trouble,
100%.
Yeah.
All right. So I was wondering what your, Tyler, what your reason for like the genesis of your book Criterium was. Like, what's the story behind why you wanted to write that?
So it started. It started with the idea of a character who finds a bike and steals it and then can't get off it. For some supernatural reason, his hands are fused to the grips, his feet won't leave the pedals, and this bike is riding on its own. And originally I thought it would be a funny story. I thought like this bike would be trying to kill this guy, running him into fences and poles and parked cars, and it would be funny. And then I asked myself, okay, so who's the character and why would he steal the bike? He has to have a reason. And then the reason just kind of appeared partly because, so I work in healthcare, and I'd seen a trend over the last, or the few months before I started writing the book of, so I work in cardiac health. So I see patients, who are having various symptoms, chest pain, racing heart, things like that. We'll put monitors on them, do EKGs, that kind of thing. And it's interesting because on average, a doctor spends about 7 minutes with a patient. And I spend 30 to 40 minutes with the patient. So I end up hearing a lot of things that the patient doesn't tell the doctor. And I know that because the patient will say, I never even mentioned this to my doctor. And I don't know what it is, just sometimes sitting with somebody and just asking, so what are you feeling? What's going on? And they start talking about their symptoms, but they begin connecting their symptoms to things happening in their life as well. And they start fishing a little bit like, well, my husband just died 3 months ago. Do you think that could be causing any of this? And I often give patients a space to just open up and talk about it, and get a better sense of what's going on in their life. And it helps me as a healthcare provider because then I'm able to determine, are we dealing with something really serious here? Or are there extenuating circumstances that are maybe causing stress? So it's just part of how I operate in talking with patients. So long story short, I started seeing a lot of patients confessing to being addicted to pain meds. And there was one guy in particular that he just seemed really weighed down by it. And as he told me his story, he was working construction and he'd fallen, he'd cracked his hip, which needed surgery. But in the meantime, they gave him some oxycodone to deal with the pain. He'd never tried anything before. So when he took these pills, it was like, whoa. Mm-hmm. And then he had surgery, and then they gave him more oxycodone for that. And he realized that it not only took away the pain from the hip, but the pain of being alive, the stress of family and job and all that. And so he started telling his doctor that he was in pain, even though the hip was healing, so that he could get more meds. Mm-hmm. And that's when it went off that, okay, maybe I have a problem. And I started it was just one of those things where, like, during a 2-week period of time, I saw like 6 or 7 patients, and they weren't who you'd expect either. Mm-hmm. And part of that is just the nature of prescription drugs. Anyone can get them. Yeah. You don't have to go out on the street to score it, but it's heroin. It's the same stuff. Like on a molecular level, it's not that different. So that really got me thinking about who this character was who steals the bike. And I thought, it's an addict. And once that locked into my brain, then I had like this hyper awareness of the addictions of our culture. It is so prevalent in so many ways, which I'm sure we can dive into more. But that was the genesis of the story, is that, okay, this isn't a funny story anymore. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even think of it as Chad, you and I were talking before we started recording, as something allegorical initially. And that didn't really click for me until later, oddly enough. I mean, you know how it goes when you write. You've got the ideas and they're coming together and you're writing, and it's not till you're way into the project that you realize, oh, the subconscious was doing something there. Okay.
Yeah, it is funny because then you look like some kind of genius that knew from the get-go what you were doing. It just happened to stumble across that. I love that. Yeah.
Isn't that Stephen King's philosophy regarding like archetypes and symbolism, that it comes after you've been excavating the story? Because he's talking about like you're digging the story out, and it's like a block, and that you don't want to superimpose it. You want to allow that thing to arise, and once you do, you might begin to see motifs and other things that begin to kind of flesh itself out. But it's been there the whole time. It's been, because it's coming from you.
Yeah, he talked about the importance of doing it that way rather than trying to build something around an agenda like Birdemic. The people, like the people who remade Black Christmas.
Oh no,
we've got this agenda. Let's remake Black Christmas and tell our own story using that. But Anyway,
One of
yeah,
my favorite quotes from an artist is Michelangelo. He was, I can't remember what sculpture it was, but somebody asked him how did he sculpt like David, or he did one of, I believe, Michael the Archangel. And he said, I saw, because he starts with just a block of marble, and he said, I saw the angel trapped in the marble and I just set him free.
Yeah.
So you start with
crazy.
this solid thing, and then shape it over time until it's something beautiful. And I don't know that you completely understand what it's going to be by the time you're finished with it until it's standing there in front of you.
Yeah. And that's cool. That I like you were mentioning earlier, you start out with a supernatural thing, and it's so weird. It didn't really become like, when I was reading it, it wasn't a supernatural bike. It was the bike was addiction itself, traveling down the same road as someone else that has already crashed before you, doing what you're doing. And by the time you hop on it too, it can't be stopped, which is the perfect parallel with addiction. So
yeah. In that the path that he was following was that of his father,
right?
Which you see a lot in our culture,
right? Which is it's weird. I was just talking to, I think it was my son, my youngest son. He's 16. Just talking to him about stuff and how some kids, it's sad because their road is kind of paved out for them already. Like if their parents are big partiers, drinkers, or doing drugs or whatever, and they have their kids and they raise their kids and they're still doing this, there's a high probability that their child, despite the hell that they're going through and despite the hell that they see that their parents are going through, are going to stay on that road and follow that road, whether it be from trying to mask the scars that their parents left behind in their crappy childhood and using this stuff as a crutch, or out of curiosity, and then they get into it and it's too late by then. But then there's also some outliers, and I've got some friends who a handful of friends who became really successful, like went to college and got great careers. A couple of them are pharmacists, but they grew up in dysfunctional homes where parents were alcoholics and drug addicts, and they decided, no, I'm not gonna do this. And I think it's so weird. And that you would think that you can, for the most part, you can look at parents who have children and look at the children and see them as they grow up and go. And because I've called it many times with people that I've seen have kids and know what their life is like. They don't stop, and now the kids are in their 20s and they're doing the same thing. And they have a horrible job, constantly moving around and constantly moving jobs and stuff like that, and in bad relationship after another. And but then you've got the outliers who can somehow say, I don't want anything to do with that. And I don't know if it's just their DNA, or I wish I knew the answer to where like what makes that different, where you've got the same kind of like upbringing with all of this, but the other person is rebelling against what their parents do, and the other one is, the majority of them are going down the same path.
Yeah, it's partly that nature versus nurture argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it the nature of the child, or is it how they were brought up? But then I think at a certain point, the law of averages takes over. Yeah. That if you have a nation as addicted as we are, and by all the stats that I've read, we consume more illicit drugs or illegal drugs. We consume more hard liquor. We consume more prescription drugs than any other nation on earth. And we are the richest nation on earth. Yeah. So like that tells me that there is there's a deeper problem. So, but just by the law of averages, if you have that many addicts that exist in a nation, some are going to make it out. But like you said, they're outliers. Maybe that's the anomaly, is that it's a wonder that any kids who are raised in homes like that make it out alive or make it out and end up rebelling against what they were brought up with.
Well, and it's so many different addictions too. I before
So
saying
many.
anything about that, the idea of nature nurture, it's one of those things I enjoy reading about. I like Steven Pinker, his book Blank Slate, talking about studies done on twins that were raised in wildly different places, didn't know of each other. Later, both of them like jazz, both of them were into the same kind of Thai food or something, like really specific things about both of them, and said, look, there's a genetic idea to this, and also the impact of family versus the impact of your friends. And a lot of people, more traditionally minded people say, it's the parents, it's their influence. But I think that parents are intuitively wise when they say you are who you're around, because parents know that there's a truth to that too. And part of that is what society you're in. If you're in a society that is addicted not just to illicit drugs, but even just to amusement, just to the pleasure of things, immediate gratification. The concept of delayed gratification is practically non-existent in any sphere of our life, from things as mundane that are now finding their way onto charts regarding addiction to do with media consumption. Where there's places now, even in foreign countries, where you go through real programs, you live there for a while, you're cut off, and the idea is you don't go back. You don't go back to that, or else you're going to fall right back into the 12 hours a day watching stuff. So whether it's amusements, from being a kid, throwing somebody down in front of a TV, and the way that trains a child to enjoy something and want that immediate pleasure, and not being willing to endure discomfort or suffering. There's a value in suffering. Traditional minded people would say, there's a blessing in carrying a cross. And the modern mind says, screw that. Give me some Zoloft, right? Like, give me some medicine. Give me Percocet. Give me something that's going to fix this right now, because I'm uncomfortable. I am suffering. I don't like this. I'm a discontent of civilization around me. And I think that's why the further we've gone down that route, we found ourselves with a lot of people like Chad saying they're professional people. You would not think that they would find themselves in this predicament, but they endured suffering. And they didn't endure it. They experienced it, and they did not wish to endure it. They didn't have a philosophy of suffering or even a philosophy of death. And to say, in that situation, I want to have that go away, not understanding the cost, the price tag of that. No free lunch with Percocet. And so it leads to all these other things. And so. Yeah.
Particularly with prescription medication too, because you see that, at least I see a lot of patients who think any medicine is the fix itself, and it's not the case, and that can lead to some serious disappointment. If you think I have an issue, so whatever it is, whether it's high blood pressure or depression, and you prescribe a pill and that fixes the problem, particularly with psychological, mental health issues. It's not addressing the symptom, it's addressing the symptoms, not the root cause. And you find people who are, taking various medicines for years and years and years. And I wonder sometimes, are you getting to the root of the problem? I'm not saying that some people don't need that. I'm sure they do, but it makes you wonder. Like if under any other circumstance, if you were coming to the doctor with knee pain year after year after year, like we need to get to the cause of that. We can't just keep treating it with medicine. We have to fix the source of the problem. And I think that as a society, we're really bad at diagnosing ourselves and whatever we're lacking spiritually or emotionally inside. We're terrible at just filling these holes with whether it's entertainment or prescriptions or alcohol, and it's amazing how many of those we're okay with, we just kind of joke around about it. Like, oh, I've been drinking every night, for years, and just to deal with the stress. And
My vices, people see I'm vaping during the show, right? And also that I have coffee. My wife came in earlier, and that's who came in the door. And you might hear my little baby Wolfgang comes by the door. He's beating on the window. Yeah, Wolfgang Phoenix, the most manly boy that's ever been born. Came out with a battle axe and a beard. But the coffee thing, I mean, think of the excuses I make for myself. Like, I'm so tired, right? And I say, man, I'm really tired. I need my coffee. And if people say, well, when'd you go to bed? And I'm like, well, like midnight. And they're like, why? And I'm like, well, I was watching The Walking Dead. And they're like, yeah, because, Netflix is winning against sleep. It was in their memo. They've admitted their number one competition in the world is sleep. And they very proudly stated to their internal people, and we're winning against sleep. And yet we do that and we say, well, I need to fix it this way, instead of saying, maybe I should close my eyes earlier. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should exercise. Well, I'm not tired. I'm still awake. Well, have you been exercising? Well, no, I've been sitting down watching stuff, or doing this.
I get in these arguments with my wife sometimes. I don't know if I call them arguments, discussions, where like my youngest boy, he has ADHD. He was diagnosed with ADHD, and I come from the, I don't know if you guys agree with me on this or not, but I don't really subscribe to the whole let's fix it with a pill thing. I think a lot of things, some things do need to be fixed with a pill, but I also believe big time in lifestyle changes. And, if someone tells me, for example, I'm really depressed and paranoid, well, I drink every night and I also smoke pot. And I was like, well, pot can make you paranoid and alcohol is a depressant. And they're like, well, yeah, and I'm not eating well. And I was like, well, they're like, but I started taking Prozac and I feel better. And I was like, yeah, but what if you just made some lifestyle changes, and not only would you feel better, you'd have that contentment that comes along with kicking this problem, ass on your own. And having it be real, so we discuss sometimes about the ADHD thing, and I'm like, you got to understand, she's like, well, maybe medication, or and I was like, well, first of all, I'm not even sure that I believe in most of the diagnoses given for that condition, because of the world that we live in, because of what Jeremiah was talking about, instant gratification and the internet and the cell phones and stuff. I mean, how could you grow up in this day and age and not feel like you had ADD or ADHD?
Torn in 100 different directions.
Yeah. I mean, even me, as I got older and I started, the internet came along, and I have so many hobbies and so many interests that if you are into movies and music and art as much as I do, I can spend all day, when's this band coming out with this album, and look at this artwork, and how do you jump on YouTube now? How do you do that watercolor technique? And then I'm over here listening or watching a writing podcast and all this. I'm just all over the place. And then I was telling my wife too the other day about music, and how when I grew up, I'd spend $10 on an album, and I would nearly force myself to like it and give it 10 listens before I really made up my mind, because I spent money on it and I have this different appreciation for it, where now I'm like, here's a new album out. I listened 30 seconds of the first song. I was like, yeah. And I'm not gonna, ever listen to it again. Yeah. And so we debate on this stuff, and I'm like, well, what about diet changes? Eliminating sugar and having him eat more brain food. What about forcing him away from some of this, video game stuff and stuff on the phone? He's not really a big phone guy, but video game stuff, and having him read more, or I bought him a bass guitar, having him do something that he can 3 months down the road look and go, wow, I've excelled in something. Like the same way with working out. I remember when I'm a skinny dude, but when I was even skinnier when I was a kid, and when I remember a friend of mine got a weight set and he started working out, so I saved some money and I got a weight set and I started working out. And over that summer, I noticed little, my muscles looking different by the end of it. And it was the first time that I can remember having having something tangible that I could look at and go, I did this. This is whereas Nakota, my son who I'm talking about, he, at the end of this 3 months, he's put in countless hours of video games with nothing to show for it. But maybe, be a little bit better at that. But if you were playing bass or something like that, it's like, wow, look at how much better I've gotten. Look at the song I wrote, or look at these songs that I learned.
Yeah.
He hates playing the bass. He doesn't. So I don't know where the answer lies, but my wife and I definitely disagree with his diagnosis, in the sense that I believe that he's kind of a product of his environment.
Sure.
And where I think she's more prone to think that this is some kind of chemical thing for him, and it needs to be fixed with medication.
It's a complicated world to be a parent or a kid in these days.
Yeah.
Everything you're saying, the distractions, they are innumerable and everywhere. And it takes effort now more than ever, I think, to shut those things out and focus on artistic endeavors like you're talking about, whether it's bass or painting, or even the importance of being bored.
I just wrote that down.
That is.
Yes, bring boredom back. It's sexy. It's good for you, right? Bring boredom back, because it is extremely important. As at the heart of innovation, creativity, just being active. My kids are a great example of this. They'll if I let them play, and I violate what I know to be true regarding studies concerning how long kids should be on screen time before anxiety is increased and stuff like that. If I allow them on, let's say 3 hours, 4 hours a day or something, and I do that for a couple days in a row, when they're done, not only will they be irritable and, frustrating for me, but more than that, they'll say stupid things like, well, what else is there to do? And I'm like, you live in a universe, dude. you live in a universe. There's a lot of things in this world. And I tell people, I just had somebody recently, because I've been diagnosed bipolar since 2002 when I was in the Navy. And I've been on all different kinds of meds, and I've taken a different approach to this. I've tried to strike a golden mean, a balance on nature and nurture, your environment and internal. And I said, somebody told me, they said, should I try this medication? Because they're going through really tough times. Effexor is what they wanted. And I told them, I said, first of all, I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a guy who has done that before. And I've studied it and had experiences. And I said, this is all I would say to you. And I said, and I think that, I've had some psychologists worth their salt who said the same thing to me, and it was good. I said, you should not do that until, if you're like way out of control, like to the point you're way gone. I get that. It's a serious medical emergency. If, however, you're not, and you're going through a hard time, I said, try these things. Every single thing I'm going to say is free. Breathe. Do Wim Hof. Do some kind of breathing exercise daily. I said, it takes 10 minutes, and you're learning to breathe, to hold your breath. You have, hermetic stress. Same thing with cold showers. Hermetic stress that you are, and it's releasing your capillaries and other things, but saying it's good for you because you don't want to do that. You don't want that feeling. You're scared to get in that shower. You'll make any excuse in the world. You'll smell like Pigpen for a while because you'll make excuses. You just won't take a shower, but then you'll get in there and focus, deal with it, suck it up, deal with it. And when you do, you're teaching yourself in little ways, those little things that kind of trigger you and make you frustrated and you don't want to face them. You're doing it. No caffeine after 2. Go to bed early, wake up early, start to be rhythmic with the sun and the moon, right? Exercise 3 days a week. You don't have to do dramatic things. You can go out 20 minutes, but make yourself breathe heavy, right? Like make yourself do push-ups a lot or something. Get worn out for a minute. Go outside in the sun, right? Be in the sun. Try to eliminate things like extra added sugars, limit screen time, and just be quiet. Just rather than if you're in a car driving, sometimes don't put on music. Just be quiet by yourself. Close your eyes, man, for 10 minutes a day. Just be there in that moment and just try not to even think about stuff. Now, I'm not saying empty your mind. I'm saying don't just go in every direction.
Yeah.
And these things, everything I mentioned is entirely free. Every single thing.
Speaking of sun, I'm going to close this curtain real quick.
Yeah, no, you're good.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things, man, where I had somebody bring that up, and I told them this, and I can't even tell you how many times I've had this conversation with people where they reach out to me, right? A lot. And I tell them, I say, these are things I do. These are things that I do. Cause they're like, well, how are you functioning? Because I've been in a clinic twice, right? 2 weeks at one occasion and 1 week at another one. And I've been on a wild array of medications, including, by the way, ones you mentioned earlier about painkillers, and in how I became dependent upon them. And it's a little trick that they say, it's not addiction, it's dependency. And I say, it's kind of the same thing a little, for the person, because you wake up in the morning and the first thing you're thinking is, I need my Vicodin right now. Like that's right away, boom, first thing, first thought. And that's how you start your day. You're not praying, you're not meditating, you're not getting up and doing pull-ups or something. You're not going outside and looking at the sunrise and breathing. You're not doing any of that. You are saying, where is my Vicodin? And if you don't have it, like I've had people who stole mine before. I knew people who had real problems with this, and they stole my stuff. And I can't call the doctor and say, hey, somebody stole my stuff, give me more. You can't do that. And so I said I had to wean fast, and I had to deal with 2 weeks of no meds. I mean, they took a lot because they were popping like 10 at a time. So I'm sitting there and getting in hot baths, cranking it as hot as I can. I'm eating potassium like crazy. I'm walking. I'm trying to breathe and do anything I can. Waking up in the middle of the night with one arm flexed. I thought I was having a seizure because I woke up. My arm was completely tight. My leg was up in the air, completely tight, pointed, but my other side was not. And I'm looking and I'm like, what am I doing? And it was so uncomfortable. My body was just uncomfortable. And so I would walk outside. I'd go in the middle of the night and I'd walk for like 3 hours. Just in the middle of the night, I'd go up to a gazebo in the middle of the town and sit there and I would write poetry and stuff to try to deal, man. But so many people who they hear that and they don't even want to try. I said, just try a couple of them. You try watching 60 to 90 minutes on a phone or a TV in a day, and try no caffeine after 2. Or if that's too hard, try a cold shower a couple times a week, something. Or just be quiet for 20 minutes. And a week later, I just got some effexor. And then they're getting brain zaps and they're like, bah! And they're like, what's this feeling? I'm having nightmares and I'm eating people and stuff. And I'm like, you wouldn't be having that if you would do what this is free. This is nature. This is normal human activity. Yeah. But it's hard, man. And but that each one of those things requires you to do something. And it's hard, man. In today's society, like you were saying, how do people even grow up in this? It's hard.
Well, it's not only busy and frantic. I think that there's a lot of a byproduct of all the distractions and all the things is that by its very nature, it's selfish. It's self-centered. It's entertain me. These are things I like. Even all the things like you mentioned, Chad, the distractions, none of them are bad in their nature, but they are all things that you are pursuing for you. And I have the same things. I mean, it's actually a lot of the same things that you have, like music, books, movies, all that kind of stuff, whatever I'm interested in, but it's all self-serving. And then you add social media into the mix as well. Yeah. And it all becomes this really twisted version of self. And I think we've all noticed over the last few years that there's been a rise in this idea of self-love, self-care. And like it's one of those ideas that I think is positive to an extent, but not if it's not balanced with some acts of selflessness. If everything that we do is self-focused, like to your list, Jeremiah, I would say, and I had a friend who, still a friend, has some of the most severe depression that I've seen, and I encourage some of the same things. Exercise, man. I mean, I'm not saying don't ever take meds. I think if you need them, you need them. But maybe it should be for a period of time while you do things to also dig yourself out of this hole. And to that, I highly encourage you, do something for someone else that is selfless and commit to it. Like whether that's being a big brother, find a grade school kid that doesn't have a dad and take him out to lunch twice a week. Invest in pour out of yourself and give to someone else, because it's really hard to think of your, I was a big brother years and years ago, and it was when I was in high school, and it was at a time where you're angsty teenager and everything happening in your life is really extreme and just awful. And I thought I had problems, and then my mom encouraged me to become a big brother, and it was a remarkable experience because I got teamed up with this kid who just had a shitty life, and I got to sit down with him and have lunch and listen to his problems, and it just made everything that I was going through seem insignificant. Not that I didn't have things, but it put him in perspective, and that perspective was so valuable. And by the time we were done with lunch, man, my heart was breaking for this kid, not for me. And I think that is a useful exercise for all of us, is to focus on other people for a lot.
Yeah. I do too. I think that's great advice, and that does. In turn, honestly, it's doing a lot more for you than you might think it is. Just not to give you bragging rights, but just giving feels good.
It does, man. And I almost think of it like you've heard the old saying about forgiveness, that forgiveness is setting a prisoner free, only to find out the prisoner was you. Yeah. And I think the same is true about selflessness. Is it may be like you're saying, it does feel good and we get something out of it, but that's just a benefit of loving our fellow humans.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a benefit to you for doing something selflessly good for another person.
Yeah. And we all know that inherently. Christmas is awesome when you give someone a gift that you know they're going to appreciate. We get that.
And you don't know it until that happens. Like I my whole childhood, I was just so, excited about Christmas because I would get all these gifts. And then when I became an adult and I had a job, and the first time I remember buying, like, my siblings and my parents and stuff, presents after I didn't live there anymore. I wasn't expecting how much fun that was. And ever since then, that's the best part, man, is giving it something. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
But even just being there for somebody, we don't give ourselves time and space to even be there physically for a person. And I think, I'm glad you brought that up about doing stuff for other people, because that list is a list that I've given to numerous people. And again, just to stress, like you did, people may need meds. I'm not against medication. I've taken them. I still take some, but I say you really do need to do these other things. But a lot of times with the things that make doing that list so difficult, those habits in our lives, those addictions, in fact, in our lives that we shroud with certain language, we kind of swaddle it with certain language that makes it acceptable to ourselves, self-excusing. Because we do that, we don't have the time or space or even the desire really anymore to say, well, I'm going to go and just sit with somebody. I'm just going to go talk to them at their house. I'm going to have a party at mine. And instead of getting online and talking to somebody, and I'm not saying that's not a value, but saying that there's something different about, let's say, walking outside with somebody and having the wind in your face, the sun on your shoulders and stuff, and hearing the wind through the leaves and everything as you're talking about life and stuff you're going through. So we even set up times where we're able to have, my buddy, he's really into like tea sets and stuff. So he's got a super fancy tea collection, and he always has all these guys over. It's kind of a funny thing. We all get together and we have a tea party, and it's awesome. We talk, politics and religion and economics and culture and all that stuff. Yeah. But we're face to face. We're together. We do once a year, we read a book called The Four Men by Hilary Belloc. We read it, and it's about a guy on a journey and nostalgia and looking forward, and it's a really cool book. And we get together and we sing the songs in the book. There's songs in there, and we sing them, and we drink beer and have bread and cheese and bacon and stuff like that. And we do our thing, smoke cigars and pipe with each other. And so, like, those are things that really stand out to me. But also, like you're saying, do you think, though, that it's hard when you bring up Big Brother, for example? I hear this. I'll use a comparison. I hear this with people when they say they go on a missions trip. Like, my mom recently went and helped. I think it was constructing an orphanage down in Mexico. But I hear a lot of times in our modern society, when people talk about stuff like that, they say, "Oh, well, you're a first world person going there, and you're coming back and just feeling bad for yourself." And you're saying, I'm learning a lesson. Like when you said, I learned that my life isn't quite so bad, that some of my problems might in fact be first world problems, and that maybe there are others even in first world that have the same problems I do that I didn't realize. But you're seeing it through a redemptive lens, that there's some value to learn from that and to walk away from, to be, not only did you better the situation, not only were you there for another person, but through that experience, you're seeing faults and weaknesses of your own to make your own life even better. And yet so many people will shoot that down. At least in my experience with religion and missionary work and stuff, where they treat it that way, or adoption of kids from foreign countries who have it really rough, and they, the way they treat them as white messiahs or whatever. And it's an unfortunate thing.
But it doesn't change the reality of how useful those experiences can be. I think anybody can shoot anything down. There's a lot of experts out there online just constantly shooting down anything that, is good. In those experiences, they offer perspective, and that is what seems to be, from my place, missing from a lot of our lives, is we have no greater awareness of what's around, or we do, but in a peripheral sort of way. Like, I know people have it worse than I do, but then back to focusing on my problems. One thing I love about, speaking of addiction, one thing I love about addicts, have either of you guys ever been to an AA meeting?
Several hundred. Yeah.
Okay.
I've been to a couple. Yeah.
So that's right, Chad. You former alcoholic, is that right?
Yeah.
So better than I. What I love about former addicts or recovering addicts is they are some of the most honest people you will ever meet, because there's this hard-won self-awareness of, there's darkness in me. I have the capacity to do things and become things I never even thought I could. And with that comes this self-awareness that is so valuable. And with that comes perspective. Yeah. And I love that. I love that honesty. And it seems that we are now more than ever a society of ignoring what's in us and putting up some kind of front, or projecting a version of ourselves to the world that is dishonest. I'm better. Everything's better than it actually is. Let me post pictures of my life looking better than it actually is. I want you all to think that everything is great and fine, or when it's not, it's something that I'm going to address in a brave and courageous way. When in reality, so many people are just hurting and breaking and falling apart inside because things are not the way that they want them to be. And so in addition to, we're talking self-love, self-care, selflessness, I think there has to be some self-awareness too. I think a lot of addiction stems from a lack of self-awareness. The ability to say, I've been hurt. I was, say, abused by my dad, and I've carried that inside. It's turned into this bitterness in me, and it's got nowhere else to go. I don't know what to do with it. And when I drink, you know what? I feel better. Okay. I can actually sleep at night. Or it doesn't quite, the pain isn't quite as sharp. And until you address that thing, that, I've been wounded, and this is an open wound, it's not healing. I need to work on that. I need to work on me in some way and fix that. Until we have that self-awareness, that it's hard for people to heal, I think. And then that is like step, 1 or 2 on the road potentially to addiction.
Mhm. Yeah, it's weird that you bring that up, because the whole self-awareness thing, because as you mentioned, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I went through drug and alcohol rehab when in my late teens. I started really early, like 12. And so by the time I was almost 20, I was done with drugs. Like, I haven't even so much as smoked a joint since like 1988, 1989, something like that.
Good for you, man.
The drinking was a little bit different story. It was always my drug of choice.
Yeah.
And I was on and off that, a year sober here, and then going back out for 6 months, a year sober there, getting 10 years of sobriety, and then trying to be a casual drinker, which it was fine. I've never been a violent drunk. I've never been the belligerent type. Even when my oldest, my daughter, she even actually, when I was trying to be a casual drinker that turned into like a 6-pack every other night thing by myself, not as a social thing. But she actually thought I was nicer when I was drinking. And I was never like stumbling around or anything like that, but it was a personal conviction for me. I knew it wasn't healthy for me, emotionally or spiritually, or just health wise, or for the message that it was sending to my kids, that I'm not with friends. I'm sitting here, and at the end of the night, I have between 6 to 8 beers sitting around me, and this isn't what you're supposed to be doing. I mean, I envy those who can buy a 6-pack and put it in their fridge, and it's still there a week later, and they just get home from work and they grab 1 or 2. I've just never been like that. I hope to. I still actually have hopes that maybe one day I can be that. I mean, I'm drawn to the idea of home brewing, and now they have all these crazy beers and stuff. Where I was just like, what's the cheapest beer? Oh, Goebbels. Okay, it's only
the natty ice guy.
Yeah.
Right.
But again, not and when I look back at it, when I was going through treatment, it was a court order type of thing. And because I had gotten into some trouble, and it was like, you can either stay here incarcerated, or you can go to this 45-day program. Well, in hindsight, when you compare my drug use and my drinking to what we have today, it was child's play, because it's like, it was mostly just a lot of weed, a lot of drinking, pills here and there, a little bit of coke, but it wasn't, meth and heroin and crack and all that kind of stuff. It was more like, I see these kids that party nowadays, and I think of the ones, when we were partying in the 80s, it was more of a, oh, this feels good. Let's party and have a good time and laugh and make fools of ourselves. Now it's like, I need this to get by, because I hate myself and I hate my life.
Yeah.
And then that quickly moves from, smoking a joint to oftentimes to other stuff. And then, we've talked a lot about the prescription thing, which is really unfortunate, because, a kid gets a tooth infection, or, breaks his ankle playing football and stuff, and doesn't realize this is for a lot of these kids, this is the beginning of a lifelong addiction for them, just by having, if they have an addictive personality. But, and when I went through treatment, I couldn't believe what I learned in there, and it was the best experience of my entire life. And still like use that type of stuff. And I'm so thankful, and I am self-aware, I think sometimes almost to a fault. Like I a lot of self-condemning and things, and I take issue with with people who aren't self-aware, or particularly people who don't take inventory. I don't understand that, and I'm super like hyper empathetic, and maybe it is from AA meetings, in learning, and everything that you said. I've always tried to put my finger on it and been like, like when we were going through the election year and you had the right hating the left and left hating the right, and then people hating Trump as a human being and wanting him to literally die, not being a fan of Trump, but being a fan of humanity and not understanding how somebody can. And I'm like, are you serious? You really want this person, like bad things for this person? And I couldn't get behind it. I don't understand that mentality. And Trump was just a one example, and I only bring it up because it's over with. But that kind of thing, I see it on Twitter all the time. And it's like, if you see some author make a stupid mistake in his choice of words or whatever, some of these people want this person dead. And I'm like, I've said worse than that person just said. So have you many times. Yeah. So, why are so many, it's something that bothers me more than anything as far as social media
it's that self-awareness, right?
Yeah.
That ability to say, oh, well, I'm not going to throw the first stone.
Yeah.
Because like you said, I've said or thought the same things, but it connects back to that selfishness as well. That if you are the one attacking on social media, there is going to be a group of people in support of your attack. So you get the rush of being on the right.
The validation.
Yeah. And it's a really, it's like the snake eating its tail, where does one end and the other begin? It's just this endless cycle that we've created. It's just madness. It's all madness.
Well, and you guys mentioned phrases like, he without sin cast the first stone, right? Or forgiveness. Where those concepts came from in modern times is toast. People have walked away. There used to be, and I don't ever want to think that, America was like just this, every single person was, on their knees in the morning and doing meal prayer before and after their meals and always going to church, and everybody's just, that's fake. However, there was still kind of a social expectation. There was still a social norm, right? That said, that was rooted in ideas that came from that. So that if somebody did fall, or if somebody was an addict, or somebody did have a problem with something, or they made a mistake, that we saw ourselves in that, because we saw ourselves as sinners in need of a savior. We saw ourselves as sinners needing forgiveness, as sinners who needed to repent. And those terms were not offensive. We didn't consider them old-fashioned or out of date, or, anything like that, or ignorant or wrong. I mean, nowadays, a lot of people just say, well, that's just crazy. And you say, well, look at the loss of this and where we are. And I don't want to get too religious on people, because we don't talk very much about it on the show, but it's important, I think, because, even in talking about AA, they say, look, even if it's not Jesus, you've got some divine thing in your life that's going to help you through this, that you need to have that. And even as
something bigger than you,
higher power.
Higher power, something bigger than you, because they understand the value of transcendent. And the troubles that happen when a person, much less an entire society, accepts an imminent frame, that everything is imminent, everything is here, everything is now, there's nothing above and beyond me. And, you mentioned the self, and I don't know if you've ever seen this, but there's a documentary called The Century of Self. And it's about Sigmund Freud and about his nephew, Edward Bernays. And the whole movement of public relations and, marketing and advertisement, and how to get people to do certain things that have to do even with pleasure, and his concept of taking his uncle's beliefs and saying it's all about pleasure. If you can make it so that person, rather than giving the information about it, you wrap it up in a story that they can identify with, that's like a parable that makes them feel good. Like toothpaste commercials of a guy, or deodorant commercials of a guy at a dance club, and there's some girls by him and little stinky smells come up and they're like, ugh, and they walk away and he's depressed. And then he goes home and it's got the montage music as he's wiping the deodorant, and he goes back, and next thing you know, he's got the ladies, bumping up on him, and he's smiling, and it shows the thing. It says, it's this deodorant, and that's what it did. Well, it taps into this thing that says, well, I want that. I'm sad because I don't have that. I fear that. And so it's a fantastic documentary. It's long. It's like 4 hours long. It's a series.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. And so it's a really good one. But I wanted to ask you, because before we run out of time, because we've been together for about an hour, a little bit more than that. So, but I wanted to ask you, situations, man, where like there's a documentary done by, I think, Vice did a documentary about different documentaries about drugs. And they cover this one drug, and I think they were in Russia, if I remember right, in places that are just devastated. I mean, I don't know anywhere in America that looks like that, right? Like that's another level. And there's these people, they're just needles everywhere on the ground, and they're doing this drug called crocodile, and they make it out of paint thinner and other stuff, and they used to be heroin addicts, and they say this is even better, but it literally is eating their skin. It eats their muscle. They have holes in their body. They look like zombies. And the documentarian would ask them, say, why are you doing this? I mean, you're literally watching as your arm is, you can see your muscle and bone. Like, why are you doing that? And they say, well, you're going to die some way. I'm either going to die from this, or I'm going to die trying to get it, kind of thing. What do we do in situations like that? Like, what are, when you've ever confronted those, how have you dealt with that in dealing with people where a lot of individuals would just say, well, it's a lost cause. You just got to let the person go, without wanting to be too controlling and saying, I'm not going to let it go. I'm just going to just control this person. But saying, how do you balance that to say, to keep hope alive for that person, and yet at the same time recognize that this person is so entrenched, they've turned themselves over in a way. How do we maintain hope, and what are things that you think would be even wise or prudent or helpful to do?
Teach us, Tyler.
Yeah.
Well, so I've worked in healthcare for 25 years now, and I've met a lot of people in a variety of different situations, and I've seen a few in, not skin and muscle falling off, but in severe situations where, like, repeat visitors to the hospital, repeat overdoses, and some are determined, like, I'm going to die, and this is how I'm going to die. So as soon as I get out of here, I'm going to go right back to doing it again. And I've had the opportunity to have some conversations with those people. And the first thing, in answer to your question, is to not focus on the addiction itself, because I don't think that's the problem. That's a symptom of the problem. So asking questions about this person and what's going on in their life, like digging down and listening, because I don't think a lot of people, and I've overheard some of the therapy sessions that take place in the hospital too, like on the behavioral health ward, and I don't know, I'm sure it's useful for some people, but there are others where I sense that it's not very useful, that they need somebody to just ask, something is eating you up. What is it? What's going on? When did it start? Why do you remember why? And get them thinking about how they got on this path, because they're so far down the road that I don't think it's very often they've been asked to turn around and look back and see, when did you first get on it and why? Like, you're trying to fix something, but what you're doing isn't working. So how can we even address the addiction until we understand why? I just think that's so important. I think that people
get to the root of it.
Yeah, they're so complex, man, and we are deep, complicated people, and it seems like, I don't know, we're just constantly addressing the surface of things, constantly, and that's not where any of the problems are ever. And even like what you were talking about, Chad, with people, I wish so and so would die, or wishing ill on others. It's like every time somebody, to me anyway, speaks like that, it's almost like they're just tearing open their chest and saying, hey, look at the ugly in me. It's there. I can't see it myself, but you all can see it now.
Yeah.
You know, like you got to address this stuff. We have to address this stuff. I have to address it in me. You know, otherwise I'm not going to have a marriage or a job or a family if I constantly push this stuff down. And I think that's what, I don't know. It seems like our society is rewards that. Like everything's fine. You're okay.
Yeah,
Or
even
you
in them,
celebrate not being okay. That's the other, like the other end of the spectrum is to celebrate not being. I've got all these problems.
Yep.
I don't know.
That's what I was going
I
to say.
hope that
I was
answers
gonna
your
add
question.
that. Well, it reminds me. Yeah, it reminds me of the mythology, right? The archetypes and the symbolism and mythology of looking into an abyss, right? And the hero's journey of fighting the dragon and realizing the dragon is you, right? And that you have to be able to go on that journey, to be willing to die, right? To say, I have to face this thing. I'm going to face down this monster. I'm going to pull a Beowulf. I'm going to fight this thing. And I'm going to realize at the end that it's me. And that that darkness that I'm looking into is the darkness of me. And that in conquering this, it can either devour you. The flames can surround you, leave you scorched, and you're done. Or you can conquer this thing. And in conquering it, you're the master of two worlds. You walk away not perfect. You don't walk away and say, I will never be. You have scars. You have battle scars, right?
Yeah.
You have fears that may come up from having gone through that journey that stick with you. But yet at the same time, the value of having found yourself in that abyss and having slayed that self in the dragon is of a redemptive quality.
Yeah. You brought up Freud a bit earlier in regards to that documentary. And I think I went through a period of time where I was just absolutely fascinated with both Freud and Jung.
Yeah.
And I'm definitely more of a Jung man.
Yeah.
I think that Freud's philosophy, and I'm simplifying it, but the general philosophy, as I understand it, and I've read a significant amount of his work, was we are basically the sum of everything that's happened to us. That we don't have much of a choice in who we become because it's circumstantial. It's nature versus nurture. You are where you are. You can't choose your parents. You can't choose who dies and who abuses you. Like, you are just the culmination of all the events in your life over which you have no control. Jung took the position of, no, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And which seems to be a far wiser way to live life, is because we take some ownership in who we become, which means that who we are, if we don't like it, it is the result of our choices. And that means we can then make choices to become better. So it requires our participation, whereas Freud's view of things is very passive. Like, you got a shitty hand. Yeah. Good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck, or just accept by caving, accept by allowing that appetite, share your bed with your mama. Right? Like, I'm serious. Yeah, seriously. Like, you're discontent to civilization. I understand it. It's Oedipus complex. Go and rock that marriage bed with your mom. So, like, or do drugs, do what you desire, do those urges.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about earlier in regards to Criterium with the kid following his dad's footsteps. That was something I was going to mention that I forgot, is that's something that you see a lot, is that the failure of the parents can in some ways shape the failures of the child in a psychological way, where it's almost like they're riding a bike and there's a tree up ahead and they can totally avoid it. But they think, well, the last time I rode my bike, I hit that tree. So there's no way I'm going to avoid it this time. And sure enough, you start slowly going into the tree. Like they psychologically think, well, because dad was an alcoholic, I'm going to be an alcoholic. Oh, yep. Right. Sure enough, here I go. Just like I knew I would. Carl Jung has this phenomenal quote. It's one of my favorites of all time. He says, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate.
Yeah.
I think it is one of the most insightful, brilliant things that has ever been said about the human condition. That until we take what is in us and realize we have to be aware of it, be honest about it. Like we were talking about, the honesty of addicts. That's what I love. I love that when people are like, yep, recovering alcoholic. I can't drink. No big deal. You guys go for it. But I have a friend. I went to a party at his house, and they had a bunch of alcohol out. And at the end of it's a Christmas party. He was like, okay, I need everyone to take the bottles home because I have a problem. So I need this to go.
Yeah.
And I love it because he just put it out there. You know, it wasn't like this weird secretive thing. It was just, I got an issue. And I've been a recovering alcoholic for 7 years, and you know, here we go. Get rid of the bottles. And I love that honesty. So he's made the unconscious conscious. He is aware of what he has the capacity to become, and he's taken efforts to fix that. And it's a sad thing when you see lives just careening all over the place, and you can see clearly why, but they seem to have no idea. And I think that is the root of all those problems. So I subscribe to a more Jungian view of things than Freud, because I always think that we have a shot, that humans are always redeemable, no matter how far, you know. But you have to want to. You can't.
I still like reading Freud, but I'm with you on Jung.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a brilliant thinker.
Yeah.
So this is why I chose this topic when we're going to have Tyler on, because I wanted to draw all this intellectual stuff out of Tyler.
Yeah, man.
But
man, we could go Jung all night.
Yeah.
But another reason was because I had just written Criterium by Tyler, and if you want to read a cool allegory about drug addiction, and this would be a good book. Also, I'm gonna promote my own book, man.
Do it.
If you want to read just a somber thing where some kid thinks that he can try heroin just once, then I have a novella called Wallflower.
It's a great book.
And thank you. It's so weird. I have gotten so many comments about I get different comments about different books that kind of like say sort of the same thing, but with Wallflower, man, so many people have said it needs to be taught in schools, and I don't know about that, but like they need to give this to high school students, and it's like I don't see it like that, but you know,
it's good.
No, man, get it. That's like, it's tapping into. I've had the same thing with Criterion, man. Messages that like really mean a lot to me. Letters from people reaching out, and they don't do it publicly, which I love even more. No. They're like, this is my story, or it was my story, or whatever, or this is the story of my son or someone I know and love. It's like we're tapping into something that is real, that's out there, that I don't know is being addressed enough. You know, I don't know that enough people are willing to say, like, we are a culture of addicts. We foster it, we support it, we celebrate it, and we make it okay, which is just the craziest thing to me. But when you address that for what it is, not some polished, shiny version of it, you know, that people may put online, like, here I am again with a drink in my hand because I'm relaxing and this is what I do. Once you address the insidious nature of it, I think that people instinctively know that. Like, they know that certain behaviors are not healthy. And I kind of lost my train of thought, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it's addressing what's out there, and we all know it's out there, but it can be an uncomfortable conversation. It can be an uncomfortable thing to address. And
because it's personal. Because at this point, with as many addictions as everyone seems to be falling prey to, it's inevitably personal. Because you're going to see that it's a mirror, and the third person effect is going to kick in hard. You know, well, I can't believe how many people struggle with this and that, right? It's going to turn into everybody else. I live in a world of weirdos. And it's like, well, dude, we're talking you too, you know, and just, I think even part of that conversation with people to address it on a personal level and say, these are things I deal with too. Right. Not in a way to boast of it, like people who, you know, their bios are nothing but issues that they have. They wear them like, you know, Boy Scout or Girl Scout badges and stuff, but not that, but saying, this is really who I am. It's my heart. This is things I struggle with. These are things that don't define me, but things that are part of my life. And here's why I think we have an issue. And it's not just me. Why I can see myself in you. and I can see you and me.
Yeah.
And that's empathy too, you know,
It's the human condition.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't want to keep. I could keep.
Yeah,
all night,
yeah,
hang out with
forever.
you guys and talk all kinds of
Forever.
stuff.
Yeah.
But I briefly, Tyler, I know that you got some stuff coming out. Can you talk about that? You got, I don't know if you have dates and give us some titles and stuff. I've seen the covers on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah. So the two novellas that I have out right now, Criterium and The Dark Side of the Room, I'm going to be reissuing those in late September. And I'm really lucky to have, so the new edition of Criterion will have a new companion novella called Enter Softly, and it'll have an introduction by Jeremy Robert Johnson. So that'll be coming out, and then The Dark Side of the Room will also have a new companion novella and an introduction by Philip Fracassi. And the reason I decided to reissue them, I was a little like apprehensive about that. I didn't want to appear like I'm reissuing a book that's been out for a year. But I decided I had these ideas for these companion stories. And so I thought, well, I want to include them in the book as well. So that's the nature of the reissue. And then I'll have a new book called Almost Ruth coming out. I'm hopeful that it's going to be out in October. It might be early November. And so the two companion novellas and the reissues, those are going to be collected into their own volume along with a prequel story to Almost Ruth. So it'll be kind of a mini collection. Okay. So that'll be four things coming out this year. So the first two reissues along with the mini collection should be out late September. And then the new book, Almost Ruth, will be out October, maybe early November. And then at some point next year, I have a short story collection coming from Cemetery Gates Media called Burn the Plans. And that, we don't have a solid date for that yet, but I'm excited about that one. It should be fun.
And I've read it.
And you have read it. Thank you, Chad.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure, Tyler.
Oh man, guys, it was my honor. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a blast hanging out with you guys.
Well, Chad, how can people get in touch with us? Well, we don't even have to say that anymore, do we?
No,
we just say go to the description, guys.
Yeah,
Give me a break.
We wisened up. I wisened up and started putting the contact info instead of giving you the boring spiel that once people hear me start to say that, they probably just shut it off anyway.
Like, oh, it's over.
Chad achieved some self-awareness and realized there was a better way to do it.
Yeah. It's in the description below. So go check it out. Make sure to reach out to us, follow us, all that jazz. Whole bunch of fun. And remember, we got another show coming out next week. It's going to be a blast. And is it back to us, man? I think we have we don't have a guest or anything.
Friday the 13th, part 3 and 4.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Friday the 13th, part 3 and 4. I got to watch them before the day. I can't do what I did last time and watch it at the same time.
On Friday the 13th.
Yeah, happy Friday the 13th, by the way.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, sounds good. Until next time, my friends.
All right, man.